Before we begin, this channel is dedicated to real survival stories, moments where ordinary days turn into life or death situations. If you're drawn to true events told in a raw, honest way, take a second to subscribe. It helps this channel grow and allows us to continue bringing these stories to life. Now, imagine standing on a frozen lake. Everything looks solid, quiet, safe. The snow beneath your boots feels firm. The air is still. And then, the ice cracks. I stepped onto the frozen lake because it looked safe. That sounds ridiculous now, but in the moment, it felt normal. The surface was flat and pale, like a wide white road stretching across the valley. The kind of winter scene you see in postcards. The air was still, the sky was heavy with gray clouds, and the snow on top of the ice made everything look solid, uniform, dependable. I told myself I would only go a short distance, just far enough to take a better photo of the tree line on the opposite shore, just far enough to feel that quiet, that clean silence you only get in winter when the world is muted. I wasn't running, I wasn't doing anything crazy, I was walking. And that's what makes it terrifying. How ordinary it was, right up until it wasn't. My boots made a soft crunch over the snow. Each step felt firm. There was no wobble, no obvious warning. The lake didn't look like a lake anymore. It looked like land. I remember thinking, this is fine. I remember thinking, people do this all the time. Then I heard the first sound, a faint crack. Not loud, not dramatic, more like the ice clearing its throat beneath me. I stopped immediately. The silence after that sound was heavier than the sound itself. I stood still and listened, holding my breath like that could make the world safer. My eyes scanned the surface. Nothing moved. Nothing changed. I took another step, slower. Another crack answered me, slightly sharper. It didn't come from one point. It came from beneath, from everywhere. I should have turned back right then. Instead, I convinced myself it was normal. Ice settles. Ice shifts. It's cold. It's expanding. It's contracting. I fed myself explanations because explanations feel like control. I took another step. And then the ice gave me a sound I will never forget. A deep, hollow pop. The snow under my feet trembled. It wasn't like the ground shaking. It was like the ground losing confidence. I froze again, heart suddenly loud in my ears. I stared down at the surface. The snow hid everything, but I could feel something underneath changing. My breath came out in a small white cloud. I told myself to move back. Carefully, slowly. One step at a time, I shifted my weight to turn. That was the moment the ice broke. Not gently, not politely. It collapsed with a violent, sudden drop, like a trap door opening beneath me. My body fell and the cold hit me instantly, like being punched by the lake itself. The water swallowed my legs, then my waist, then my chest. My breath exploded out of me in shock. I tried to inhale, and the cold stole the air from my lungs. It felt like my chest locked, like the muscles refused to work, like my body forgot how breathing was supposed to happen. The water was black, not because it was dirty, but because it was deep and lightless, and winter had erased color. I kicked wildly, not swimming, just reacting, trying to find anything solid. The edge of the ice scraped my arms. The hole was jagged. The rim crumbled when I grabbed it. My hands hit the ice and slipped. My gloves were instantly soaked. The surface was slick. My fingers couldn't grip. I tried again, throwing my weight forward. The ice broke away under my chest. The hole widened. My stomach dropped with the realization that the lake wasn't done breaking. The ice wasn't a stable platform. It was fragile, and my weight was a hammer. Panic surged like electricity. But panic in cold water is different. Panic doesn't just make you scared. It makes you burn oxygen you don't have. It makes you move fast in a place where fast is useless. It turns your body into a furnace while the lake steals heat faster than your furnace can produce it. I forced myself to stop thrashing. That was the hardest thing I've ever done, because everything in me wanted to fight, to climb, to escape immediately. But I'd already learned something in the first 10 seconds. If I kept trying to haul myself up with brute force, the ice would keep breaking. So I grabbed the rim again, slower. I tried to distribute my weight. I tried to keep my chest low instead of pushing straight up like climbing out of a pool. My breathing was still out of control. Short gasps, sharp inhales, the kind of breathing that makes your throat ache. Cold shock is not just discomfort. It's your body screaming that it doesn't belong there. I looked around trying to understand where I was. The shore was farther than I thought. That's what snow on a lake does. It erases distance. It makes everything look closer. It lies. The wind brushed my wet face, and it felt like knives. I realized something else that made my fear heavier. My clothes were pulling me down. Winter clothing is warm in the air. In water, it becomes weight. It becomes drag. It becomes something that clings and fills and steals your movement. I tried to kick to keep myself from slipping fully under. The water pressed against my chest. My arms were already numb. Not fully numb, but changing. Like sensation was being replaced by a dull, distant ache. I forced my hands onto the ice again. This time I didn't try to stand. I tried to slide. I hooked my elbows on the rim and pushed my chest forward as flat as I could. I kicked behind me, trying to get my body horizontal, trying to spread my weight across a larger area. For a second, it worked. My torso rose onto the ice. My stomach touched snow. I felt the edge hold. Hope surged so fast it almost made me reckless again. Then the ice cracked and collapsed under my elbows. I dropped back down into the water. The sound of that break was louder than the first. It felt personal now, like the lake was warning me, "You don't get to climb out that way." My teeth began to chatter, not dramatically, not like a movie, but small, uncontrollable tremors. My jaw tightened and shook. I could barely feel my fingers inside the soaked gloves. I knew enough to understand the timeline, even if I didn't want to say it out loud. In cold water, you don't have hours. You have minutes. Not because you'll freeze instantly, but because your hands stop working first. And when your hands stop working, you can't climb. You can't hold. You can't save yourself. I looked at the ice around the hole. Snow-covered, but underneath it, a darker surface, smooth, slippery. I tried to clear snow away with my forearm, desperate to find a rougher patch to grip. My arm moved like it belonged to someone else. My muscles felt slow, heavy. I forced myself to breathe in through my nose, out through my mouth, trying to slow the panic. In, out, in, out. The air tasted like metal. I tried again, but this time I changed the approach. I wasn't going to pull myself up. I was going to swim onto the ice. I pressed my chest to the rim and kicked hard, aiming to get my stomach onto the surface like a seal sliding onto a rock. I kept my head low. I tried not to put all my weight on my hands. For a second, my body rose again. My abdomen hit the ice. My hips followed. I felt the snow under my chest. It was so close. I could almost imagine I was out. Then my leg caught on the edge and I instinctively pushed up with my arms. The ice snapped. I dropped back in, deeper this time, and the water surged up around my neck. A sound came out of me that I didn't recognize. Not a word, not a scream, more like an animal noise. Because at that moment, logic stopped being smooth. It became jagged. My mind started producing thoughts like flashes. I can't get out. I'm not going to get out. No one knows I'm here. And then a deeper thought underneath all of them. This is how people disappear. Not in storms, not in avalanches, not in dramatic final moments, but in quiet places, on normal days because of one wrong assumption. I forced myself to look at the shoreline again. It was far, but not impossible. If I could get onto the ice even briefly, I could crawl. But I had to get onto the ice. I had to. My hands were failing. I could feel it. The strength in my grip wasn't just getting weaker. It was becoming unreliable, like a tool slipping out of my control. I tried to shout. My voice came out thin and broken, swallowed by the wind. I shouted again, louder. Nothing answered, just the stormy silence of a winter lake. I remember thinking about how absurd it was that the world could be so quiet while I was fighting for my life. I tried again, but now my technique was desperate and careful at the same time. I hooked my forearms onto the ice, not my hands. I pressed down with my elbows, trying to create leverage with parts of my arms that still had strength. I kicked behind me hard, pushing my torso up. This time, I didn't aim to stand. I aimed to stay flat. My chest slid onto the ice. My stomach followed. My hips rose. The ice held. I didn't celebrate. I didn't even breathe properly. I just kept moving because I knew the ice could break again at any moment. I dragged myself forward like crawling out of a nightmare. My wet clothing clung to the surface. My knees tried to come up beneath me, and I forced them back down. I stayed flat, spreading my weight, inching forward. The moment my body was fully out of the water, the cold changed. In the water, the cold was violent. Out of the water, it became cruel. Wind on wet clothing is its own kind of danger. It doesn't just feel cold. It pulls heat out of you like a vacuum. I crawled. I didn't look back at the hole. I couldn't. I crawled away from it, dragging my body across snow, trying to get distance, trying to get to ice that felt thicker. After several feet, I tried to stand. My legs didn't respond. They shook violently. My balance was wrong. My feet slipped. I dropped back to my hands and knees, but my hands were barely functional. My fingers felt like stiff pieces of wood. I crawled again. My breathing sounded strange now, rough and uneven, like I was inhaling through a narrow tube. My vision seemed slightly off, edges fading in and out. I knew what that meant too, even if I hated knowing it. Cold doesn't just make you shiver. It makes you stupid. It makes decisions feel distant. It makes your body prioritize survival in ways you don't get to negotiate. I kept crawling. The shore was getting closer, but not fast enough. I wanted to rest. I wanted to stop moving for just 10 seconds. That's the trap. In extreme cold, rest is seductive. Rest feels like relief. Rest is where people die. I forced myself to keep moving. My mouth was numb. My lips didn't feel like they belonged to me. My cheeks burned and then stopped burning. I crawled until I reached a stretch where the snow looked disturbed, thin patches where the wind had scraped it away. The ice beneath looked darker, rougher. I tried again to rise. This time, I got one knee underneath me, then the other. My legs trembled so hard it felt like the bones were rattling. I stood, half standing, hunched, arms out like a drunk man trying not to fall. I took one step. My boot slid. I caught myself. I took another step and another. Each step felt like it belonged to a different person. My body was soaked. My clothes were heavy. My breath came out in thick clouds. The shore was close now. Trees, rocks, a thin line of land. I stumbled forward like I was walking out of a dream. When my boots finally hit solid ground, I didn't feel triumph. I felt confusion, like my brain couldn't process that I was no longer on the ice. I took 2 more steps and collapsed onto the snow near the shoreline. I tried to breathe and my chest shook. My entire body shook. Not just shivering, full body tremors, uncontrollable. I rolled onto my side and tried to move my hands. My fingers barely responded. My gloves were frozen stiff at the edges. I realized how close I had been. Not in a dramatic sense, but in a factual one. If I had spent even 2 more minutes in that water, my hands would have stopped working. If my hands stopped working, I wouldn't have been able to pull myself out. And if I couldn't pull myself out, the lake would have taken me quietly. I lay there staring at the gray sky, feeling wind on my wet clothes, and I understood something simple and terrifying. Nature doesn't need to be violent to kill you. It just needs you to make one mistake, and then it waits. I forced myself to sit up. Standing was painful, not because of injury, but because my body felt like it was running on backup power. I looked back at the lake. From the shore, the hole was barely visible, just a dark scar in a field of white. If someone had walked past that spot later, they might not have noticed it at all. I tried to take my gloves off. My fingers didn't cooperate. I tried again. My hands were clumsy, slow. The kind of clumsy that makes you scared because it means you're losing control of your own body. I knew I needed warmth, fast. I needed to get moving, get shelter, get help. I pushed myself up and stumbled toward the trees, away from the open wind. Each step hurt in a strange way. Not sharp pain, but deep, aching stiffness. I could hear my breathing, loud and ragged. I tried to think clearly. Where was the nearest road, the nearest building, the nearest anything? My thoughts came slowly, like they were traveling through cold syrup. I remember focusing on one simple task. Keep moving. Just keep moving. Because stopping would be too easy. I made it to the edge of the woods, leaning against a tree for support. And that's when the reality finally caught up with me emotionally. Not the fear, not the panic, but the aftershock. The realization that I had been in a situation where the outcome could have been final and the world would have kept going. The lake would have frozen over again. Snow would have fallen. The hole would disappear. And if no one knew exactly where to search, there might be no search at all. People would say I went missing. They would guess. They would wonder. And the truth would be under ice. I closed my eyes for a second and forced myself to open them again. No resting, not yet. I kept moving. I don't remember every step after that. I remember fragments, branches, snow crunching, my own breath, the numb ache in my hands. Eventually, I reached a place where the wind wasn't as sharp, a line of trees that blocked it. I fumbled for my phone again, hoping for signal. A single bar appeared for a moment, then vanished, then returned. I didn't even think. I just hit the emergency call button. My fingers barely worked on the screen. I tried again. I got it. I got through long enough to say a few broken words. Frozen lake. Fell through. Need help. Location. And then the call dropped. But I had said enough. I sat down against the base of a tree, shaking violently, and waited, still fighting the temptation to close my eyes for too long. The snowstorm eased slightly. The wind softened. The world looked calm again, as if nothing had happened. That's what scared me most. How quickly it looked normal again. Later, when warmth finally reached my skin, when blankets and heat and hands that could actually grip returned to my world, people asked me what it felt like. They expected me to say it was terrifying, and it was. But the most terrifying part wasn't the fall. It wasn't even the cold. It was the moment I realized I could be doing everything right, trying as hard as I could, and still lose. Not because of drama, not because of evil, not because of fate, but because the ice didn't care, and the lake didn't care. It wasn't angry, it wasn't cruel, it was simply real. And for a few minutes out there, I was one small human being in a place that could erase me without leaving a trace. That's what it feels like to fall through ice. Not like a movie, like a quiet countdown. Like a mistake you can't undo. And the moment you finally crawl out, soaked and shaking, you don't feel like a hero. You feel lucky because you understand how close the line is and how easily the ice can break beneath you.